You can be seated. All right, so just a show of hands, and I'm pretty sure I know what we're going to see here. Who has at least heard of the fact that Jesus is really into forgiveness? We know that. Like, we think Jesus, forgiveness. He's really into that. Everybody knows that. It's not a disputed thing. See, Jesus is known for his forgiveness. Everybody knows that. He's all about forgiving. But, here's a harder question, and I'd like for us to think about it for a second. What is forgiveness? Like, what even is that? What does the word even mean? What are we talking about when we talk about forgiveness? Because a lot of us have a lot of different ideas of what it is and what is involved in the act of forgiving. Like, is it just like something that happens in my head? Is it something I do in my mind? That I forgive people, and how does that work? And what significance does it have that I should do that I should forgive in my mind? Or is it a behavioral thing? Are there actions associated with forgiveness? Do I do, and while I'm forgiving, is there something that I'm to do? Or does it have, just some deeper quality? Or here's a real mind bender. How do I know if I've actually done it? How do I know if I've actually forgiven? Because we're looking at a passage here, and Jesus is teaching his disciples, you should forgive. Well, how do we know that we've done it? How do we know that we've done it? And that we've done it the right way? Because, look at what verse 35 says. There's clearly a right way. Jesus says this. He says, so my heavenly Father also will do to each of you, if each of you does not from his heart forgive his brothers his trespasses, right? So he's describing a quality of authentic forgiveness from the heart, as opposed to some sort of fake imposter forgiveness that's not from the heart, right? And so how do I, a person who doesn't know his own heart or his own feelings or really anything that really well, with any kind of certainty, how do I come and I wade through that thing, through that ambiguity where I'm trying to say, have I actually done this? Because if he calls me to do it and I don't even know what it is, how can I have any certainty that I've done it? How can I have any certainty in my life that I've actually forgiven when Jesus calls me to forgive? I just hate conundrums like that. They're just the worst. They're absolutely the worst, because I'm just going to doubt myself every time. I'm going to assume that if something could be done wrong, I probably did it wrong, right? And so where's the rest in that? Where's the peace in that? How do we get to that point? And I think that we could say that the disciples, and particularly Peter, were feeling that same way too, because they had been listening to Jesus all here in the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew 18, and he's teaching on forgiveness. And Peter, always the one to speak up first. Thanks, Peter, for asking dumb questions on our behalf. Peter comes and he really asks a really sincere question. He's trying to figure out what exactly Jesus means by forgiving. What do you mean by that, Jesus? Because you say we should do it, but how do we know we've done it? And that's where we're at here in Matthew 18, in verse 21, where we're starting here. What happens is Peter goes to Jesus and he says, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive them? So literally he's asking, okay, so forgiveness is good. We get that. We know you're Jesus. You're into forgiveness. Okay, but how much? What's the right amount? What's the right amount? There certainly has to be a right amount. How many times do I need to forgive? Basically, he's saying, how much is enough? When can I say, I've done it, enough is enough, I've forgiven, so that I can check off my box and move on? And he makes a suggestion. Peter makes a suggestion. He says, is it up to 7 times? I don't know, he just kind of pulled that from the air. In the context of first century Judaism, and with the teaching that was going on, Peter's suggestion is actually pretty generous, right? Because what we know from second century rabbinical sources, because there weren't really that many first century ones, is that there was an understanding in Judaism that you should forgive 3 times. You could forgive your brother 3 times, you owed him or her that. You could forgive him 3 times. So if we think of this balloon string as the length of forgiveness, this is 3 times forgiveness. What Peter was saying is, okay, well, Jesus clearly is into forgiveness. He seems to really like this. Probably what he means is that we're not just to do it 3 times, but we're to do it 7 times. We'll give some extra grace. We'll give a few extra times of forgiveness. We're going to give a little bit more than what we understood to be, that it should be 3 times, and we're just going to give it 7 times. And that will complete Jesus' call to forgive. If we forgive up to 7 times, right? Well, it makes sense. He's trying to define it out a little bit, trying to put his finger on it so he can say, how do I know? How do I know if I've done it? So clearly Jesus is generous. 3 times isn't enough. Maybe it'll be 7 times. And of course, Jesus looks at him and he just says, no, he's not that mean. Jesus is very forgiving. He says, I don't say to you up to 7 times, but up to 77 times, right? And you can just imagine like Peter trying to think like, man, I don't have that much string. Like I can't count that high. Like I don't like, how were we ever going to get there? Like how what are you trying to say, Jesus? And the point that Jesus is trying to make, it's pretty clear. He's saying, don't try to quantify the limits and the rules. Like that's not what forgiveness is. Forgiveness isn't just, oh, I've done it so many times and so I can check off the box. What he's trying to say is, Peter, you guys just need to let go of the string. You need to just let go and forgive. Just let it go. You don't need to hold on to the other end of a fence. You don't need to measure the number of times that someone has done wrong to you so that you can say at what point it is enough. You just need to let it go. All right, so let's pray and go home. Right? No, we're not going to stop there. We're not going to stop there, right? Because though Jesus is being clear, this is difficult. This is a hard thing to wrap our minds around. Is Jesus just saying always forgive every single time? He's saying it just doesn't matter, that there's just no accountability? Is Jesus saying that really, I'm just to forgive everything just like that? Like, and how could I possibly do that? That's just not in my nature. That's not something that I feel that I have the capacity to do. But Jesus he knows this about us, right? God knows our weakness. Thank the Lord that he knows our weakness. We have a God who has revealed himself to us. He reveals that he understands all of our failures and the things that we can't do, and he enables us to do what he calls us to do. So he gives us here, and I think in this passage and throughout Matthew 18, he gives us both the how and the why of forgiveness, because we need that. We need that instruction. We need to understand how do we do it and why we should do it. He gives us those here. And I would say that we really need to think about how we forgive, especially like what is it to forgive? Because we're just not good at forgiveness. I am not good at forgiveness. I mean, you just think about the conventional wisdom of what forgiveness is, right? We all know it. Forgiveness is to forgive and forget. That's what we think. That's the best that culture could come up with. What is forgiveness? Oh, it's forgive and forget. Well, okay. But forgive and forget it's a funny phrase because it's not the sum of its parts. You know, it's not just 1 + 1 = 2. Really, forgive and forget actually is just 1. It just means just forget. Just forget about it. Forget about it, right? Don't worry about it. I've forgotten about it, right? But that's not really a good strategy unless like every time someone hurts us, we plan on just hitting ourselves in the head with a baseball bat, right? I mean, and I don't think that's no one's plan, right? Don't do that because that's not good. You shouldn't do that, right? But I mean, I don't know how else we're really going to forget. See, the way we normally think about forgiving is that we just act as if something did not happen. And that's neither forgiving nor is it forgetting. It's not forgetting because you won't forget. You can't forget. That's just like, unless you have amnesia and unless you're hitting yourself on the head with a baseball bat, you can't do that. I can't forget where I've come from and what's happened to me. I just can't do that. It's not within my capacity to do so. And it's not forgiving because forgiving is something we do, not something we don't do. You know, it's not like we fail to remember. No, we actually have some quality of forgiveness that we need to actually walk into and practice. We need to practice forgiveness. So Jesus shows us what we need to do when we forgive, and he begins to explain it with a story. Jesus tells parables all the time. He tells us stories to enlighten us about what the true dynamic is of what he's calling us to. And so we're just going to run through this parable here. We're going to learn a little bit from it. So verse 23, therefore, he begins, therefore the kingdom of heaven, it's like a certain king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. Well, that's where forgiveness starts. That's what we're seeing demonstrated kind of the first thing that is involved in forgiveness. We, like this king, we need to walk through these steps in order to practice the discipline of forgiveness. And the first step is counterintuitively, the first step is that we need to count what is owed to us. You need to count what's owed to us. You need to reckon with what has been taken from you if you're going to forgive it, right? I need to know how much my mortgage costs every month because I forget, right? So they send it to me. Every month they send me the same bill, the same amount every single month. they send me that so that I know how much I need to make the check out for. Because I can't pay something that I don't know. Nor will they, they're not going to forgive it, right? So we're not going to talk about forgiveness in banks. But luckily we don't have to. So we need to actually count what's owed to us. Because ultimately, when we are offended or when we are hurt, we feel that someone has failed to give us what is owed to us. And in a lot of very real ways, they have. There's been a lapse. There's been a failure to give what was owed to us. Sometimes people have failed to be kind to us, And for people who we should expect kindness. Sometimes people fail to be trustworthy. That's a hard one to get over. Someone you thought you could trust, you find out you can't trust them anymore. Some people fail to just respect us, to treat us the way we ought to be treated, or sometimes we're just not treated with just basic human dignity, right? Something's been robbed from us, something's been taken from us. That's a real thing, and we should reckon with that. Every time there's an offense or a hurt, something has been taken from us, or at least we think something has been taken to us. And we begin to forgive counterintuitively. We begin this disciplined process of forgiveness by actually recognizing the truth that we're owed something. Something is owed to us, and we put a name to it, and we get a sense of what it is. Just like this king, he begins to settle accounts. He begins to take stock of what's owed to him. That's where we start in forgiveness. It's counterintuitive. Well, why? Because if you don't add it up, you can't settle it. You can't write off what you haven't actually measured. And that might kind of sound like, I don't know, like psychology or self-awareness, or maybe it sounds unchristian. Doesn't that sound kind of unchristian that we should begin with counting up what's owed to us? Can't we just forgive, like whatever that means? Can't we just do that? Let's just go straight to forgiveness. Let's just let it go. Let's just act like it's okay. Let's just man up. Let's just get over it. Right? Again, conventional wisdom, the things we think that we should do, how we should begin forgiveness. That's what we think we should do. But you can't do that because that's not forgiveness. And it's not going to lead you to forgiveness. It's not going to lead you to a place where you could say, I have forgiven from the heart. It doesn't work because your heart is desperately wicked, right? Bible tells me that. My heart is desperately wicked. It's just an unknowable thing. Like I can't even see inside it. It like holds on to things, and it can. I can deceive myself in such a way where I can think that I have forgiven, but in fact I haven't. I can think, oh, I've let it go. It's in the past. I've moved on. But it's so funny. We have ways in our hearts of just taking back. We have a way to just take back what we've let go, so that we can hold it in our hands again. We said, well, I once let it go, but now I've got it again, and I'm not going to let it go now. And we do that in the secret places in our hearts, right? We do that when no one's looking. It's our little fun activity. We find ways to unforgive when we've forgiven and forgotten. When we haven't let go, though, and we haven't actually forgiven, what we're doing is actually we're doing great violence to ourselves. We are poisoning the well of our souls. Like we should not think of unforgiveness as some minor thing. Jesus doesn't he isn't hung up on things that don't matter. He looks at us, disciples, people that he's known because he, created us. And he says, you have to get over this. You have to actually learn what forgiveness actually is. You have to actually go through this. Because this stuff that we've forgiven and forgotten, it just is going to come out later. It's going to come out whether we think we've forgotten about it or not. It's going to come out in anger, right? It's going to come out in anger when we're lashing out at people. It's going to come out in cynicism. In the way we look at the world, there's the negativity. It's going to come out in depression. It's going to come out in bitterness. It's going to come out in the way we speak and think. I was reading a book by an author, and he talks about his experience of unforgiveness. And I never heard anyone talk about what he said. I thought this was great. He said, this is a sign of unforgiveness that he sees. He experiences rage fantasies. Rage fantasies. That's kind of a weird thing. So basically what he's saying is he daydreams about yelling at people that have done him wrong, setting them in their place. He's got this anger, and it comes out just in his imagination when he's all alone, when he's driving in his car, when he's thinking about things long since past. He's thinking about and imagining rage. And I was really convicted by that, because I can't say that is an unfamiliar thing to me. I can't say that I have not, in my mind, brought back anger from things long since past that I thought I had forgiven. And so I actually wanted to kind of do an informal survey, and so I texted some of my friends from college, and I said, hey, rage fantasies, I kind of defined it. I said, have any of you guys experienced that? And you know what they said? None of them had done it. It was just me who'd had that experience. But it was funny, because actually they all of them said, well, I haven't had that, but I've had something kind of like that. One of my friends said he's experienced revenge fantasies, which I guess is different than rage fantasies. It's where they just prove that person so wrong, and they are so wrong in their wrongness, and they just imagine how wrong they are, and that's somehow satisfying to that person, right? Right. Another one of my friends experienced what he called perfection fantasies, where it wasn't that the other person felt bad, but that they stepped in and made everything right. And the person who had offended them looked at them and said, you are so perfect, and you make things so beautiful. How do you do it? Right? This is the kind of things that go on in our imagination when we don't forgive. Perfection fantasies. I just love that one. Another one of my friends said this. I thought this is really good. He said, well, I don't have any of that. I usually just assume that whatever happened was my fault. And I just think about that. I just think about how I shouldn't have done the thing that caused me to be offended. I shouldn't have provoked this person to offend me. This is my fault. It's my fault. Look, the point is this. Look, unless you really forgive, unless you forgive from the heart, then this is your life. This is your life. This is my life, unless I forgive from the heart. Unless I really just cut. And I'm not going to cut it because I need to get this down later. Cut these things, these ties that I have to the past, this unforgiveness that I hide within my heart. It's going to come back. It's perfectly within my power to bring it back, if I haven't forgiven and forgiven from the heart. So we have to practice this discipline of forgiveness, and that involves intention. It involves some intention. And we begin right here. We begin by counting what's owed to us. We need to name the ways in which other people have hurt us if we're actually going to get over the past, if we're actually going to forgive them. Let's keep going. Verse 24, we're going to see what the next thing is. Verse 24, when he had begun to settle accounts, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. And so what the king does next, he begins to settle accounts. He's going to count up what's owed to him. He's accounted it. He's understood what's owed to him. And it's discovered that there is this servant, one of his own servants, owes him 10,000 talents. How much is that? I don't know. It's more than a car, and it's more than a house. That's what we can say. That's a lot of money. If I owe you a house, I owe you big time, okay? And it's more than this. And so what does he do? He calls for the person who owes him this money to come before him and explain himself. And he basically brings them before him, and he delivers to them the charge. He brings the charge against this person. He says, look, this is what you owe me. I'm going to tell you about it. And this is one of these things. This is a process. I think we need to walk through these steps if we're going to be practicing forgiveness. This is one we'd rather not do, right? This is why we'd rather forgive and forget, because we don't want to do these things. We'd rather forgive and forget because it doesn't actually involve the other person. But you know what? It can't actually lead us to forgiveness. We'd rather forgive and forget because we want to avoid this discomfort of actually coming to someone who has hurt me and say, hey, you know what? The thing is, you owe me something. I was hurt. Like that wasn't right, what you did. Instead, what do? We say, he knows what he did. Right? He knows what he did, and he can know, and I can be here, and he can know, and we can be separate, and it's fine. Or, you know what, that person knows how to find me if they want my forgiveness. They know how to come and find me, right? Those are the things that we do instead of actually just going before a person, telling them, hey, this was a fault. This is something that hurt me, right? And instead of seeking reconciliation, doing the work of reconciliation, we think the ball should be in someone else's court. The ball should be in this person's court because they were the one who started this in the first place. And so if they want to be reconciled, they need to come to me. They're the ones who hurt me. But you know what? Jesus, here's the thing, and that's like logical, right? That is the way things should be, but who cares? Who cares? I mean, what are you going to, like, should adds up to nothing. A lot of things should be different, but they're not. And we're called to be people who deal with the difficulty of should, like, and we go through the hard parts of the way that the world isn't, but it should be. And we make things beautiful because we're doing what Jesus does. Right? Jesus calls his disciples, a few verses earlier there in Matthew 18:15, Jesus tells his disciples this: if your brother sins, go show him his fault in private. It doesn't say wait for him to come to you. You just be mean to him, like kind of passive aggressive, and then eventually he's going to figure out that he did something wrong. He's going to ask you, and then you got him. And then you forgive him, right? That's not what he says. He says, if someone sins against you, you just go. You need to go. You need to let them know. You need to bring the charge before this person that something real has happened, that there's been an actual offense, there's been hurt inflicted on you, and you need to actually go ahead and go in the spirit of settling it. There's peace among people, and especially among the church of God. It's like a garden, right? Gardens need to be tended. I mean, this time of year, like, you're pretty much only growing weeds. You're not growing any plants, right? They're springing up like crazy, and if you don't take those things out, then they're going to choke out the good thing that you want to grow, right? Like, you brothers and sisters in Christ, like if you aren't doing the work of reconciliation, then there's going to be problems, right? And we are not going to be the church that we're called to be, a church where there's peace and where we're doing the work of being peacemakers, reconciling with one another. When my brother or sister offends me, I go to them for the sake of making it right, because that rightness, that peace amongst us is to be tended and cared for. It is of great value. So much greater value than the things that we put before us, you know? And if you don't want to do this, if you don't want to do the work of reconciliation, bringing the charge, actually giving a person an opportunity to apologize, if you don't want to do this, then you won't have forgiveness, and you're not going to have peace, I would argue. You're not going to have peace. If you would rather have the comfort of conflict avoidance, and I get that because I love it. I love avoiding conflict because I hate it so much. But if we would rather have the comfort of conflict avoidance and the comfort of continuing to be in the mindset that we have been hurt and that we're victims, right? Because that is comforting sometimes. It's comforting to think, man, I didn't do the wrong. Someone else did. If we value that comfort over the call of God in our lives to be reconciled, then that's a choice that we're making. We're choosing that over what God calls us to. I want to just stop here for a second because I bet I've offended a few people, and I want to be clear about what I mean. It's a hard thing to talk about forgiveness. I was thinking about this a lot when I was preparing this message, and there's hurt, there's offense, right? But then there's real hurt. There's deep things. There's things we couldn't forget if we tried, right? There's things in life that happen to us that we spend a lifetime getting over. And to treat that as like the same thing as some guy who cuts me off in the parking lot, well, I mean, that's a false equivalency, right? It would be flippant for me to just say, hey, whatever, just like forgive it all. It's all the same. The truth is, yeah, there's hurt, and then there's offense, and then there's real offense. And I don't want to give the impression that this is going to be easy and that there's just 4 steps and then, oh, wonderful. There's only 4. It's not that easy. Some things in your life, things that have been done to us, or maybe even things that we've done to other people, it's going to take years, really, to count it up. It's going to take years for us to really add up the damage. It's going to take years for us to measure some things, right? It's going to be painful time. It's going to be a painful time to come to terms with what's been done to us and things that we've done to other people. It's going to be painful to go through this process of really just charging, just letting this person know, hey, this has been done. It's going to be a long thing. Because the truth is that many of us are victims. We don't just play victims. I mean, in some things we play the victim, right? But some of us are victims. Many of us are victims. And how do you seriously deal with those things? People have truly hurt you. So I want to make sure that I'm clear that I'm not trying to diminish the seriousness of pain and to make you believe that somehow this is an easy process. But here's what I am suggesting. This is what I am suggesting, that as we practice Jesus' prescribed way of forgiveness, there's a hope and a restoration. There's a hope for restoration that's greater than the pain. We don't need to sit there and say like, oh, the pain's no big deal, and act as if it doesn't hurt, and act as if it hasn't haunted us day after day. We don't need to act as if it hasn't, but we need to understand that as great as that pain is, and as much as we feel it and maybe are plagued by it, Jesus has something greater. Like there is healing and beauty and peace so much greater, so much more powerful than the darkness in our life. And so again, it's not just saying, no big deal, things are in the past and we move on. It's that we move to something better and more powerful, the love and forgiveness of Jesus Christ, his grace and his mercy. And working through that forgiveness is going to be painful. It's going to take a long time, but it is the only real way to healing, because you're not just going to keep hitting yourself on the head. And some people spend their lives doing that with drugs and alcohol and sex and just avoidance of responsibility, right? But it doesn't make you forget. It doesn't make you forget anything. There needs to be healing. And unless we forgive, then we're not going to be moving down this path of healing, and we're going to go through life instead in bitterness. And I want to clarify one other thing here, because I think it's important. If you've been abused, like if you suffered abuse, spousal, child abuse, that doesn't mean that you continue to allow your abuser in your life. That's not what forgiveness is. I mean, we see this right here in Matthew 18, by the way. What does Jesus say? He says, if your brother goes and sins against you, show him his fault in private. Well, you've probably been doing that your whole life. And if he listens to you, then you've won a brother. But if he does not listen to you, what do? You go and you take one or two more with you, so that by the mouth of one or two witnesses every fact may be confirmed. And if he refuses to listen to them, then you go and tell the church. And if he refuses to listen to even to the church, let him be as a Gentile or a tax collector. What Jesus is showing us here is that there is safety and there is accountability and there's rescue in the church. Like we don't need to just say, forgive and just go back to the situations we've been in. No, the church is a safe place, and too often it has not been, and that needs to change. I mean, I'm not talking about this church or whatever, but people you grew up in, and you feel like pressure to just forgive, and you think that means I just go back to the abusive situation. That's not what it means. You've got brothers and sisters around you protecting you. Because that's how God has called his people to be. They're people who gather together for the sake of love and restoration, for the sake of care. Not just for the sake of getting over it. That's not what forgiveness is. It's not God's plans for the church. You are surrounded by people who care for you and who are committed to watching over you. All right, so let's keep moving here. Verse 25. But as he was not able to pay, his master commanded that he be sold, and his wife and his children and all that he had, and that payment be made. And the servant therefore fell down before him, saying, Master, have patience with me, and I will pay you all. So the king, what has he done? He's counted what's been owed to him. He's counted it up. He has brought the charge before this man. And then what does he do next? He listens to the plea of this servant. He listens to his plea. And in this case, the words that ring in the ears of the king are a cry for mercy, right? A cry for forgiveness, a cry for patience. Have patience with me. I'm going to pay it all back to you. I've done wrong, an acknowledgement of the wrong that was done. And of course, when you come into a situation hoping for reconciliation, hearing words like this, but that makes all the difference, right? When there's like a contrition and a brokenness in the person who's hurt you, that makes all the difference. But unless the king had really gone through this, sought out, brought the charge, brought him before him, accounted what was owed, then there wouldn't be this opportunity for reconciliation. And these words wouldn't have been spoken. And it's great. It's great, honestly, when we're trying to reconcile and forgive when things go well, right? It's so good when things go well and there's understanding and there can be peace from that point. But we all know that's not always how it works out, right? It's not always how it works out. Sometimes we find that the person that we're hurt us is going to dispute it. They're going to say, "No, I didn't do that," or "I didn't mean that." Right? Or they're going to say, "Well, there was some misunderstanding, and hopefully it can be worked out." And you know what? Maybe it's true. maybe you took it the wrong way, because my perceptions of things are not always correct, right? And I can misunderstand what people are trying to say. But if we didn't go through this thing where we're actually talking to people, then we can't clear up the misunderstanding, right? We can't fix this. We can't make peace. But then other times, it's not going to just be like, oh, there was a misunderstanding. There's going to be no, that's wrong, and I'm not sorry. You're going to hear that sometime. Those are going to be the words on the other end of this person that you're trying to make peace with. I'm wrong, and you're wrong, and I'm not sorry. And that's when forgiveness gets tough, right? I mean, that's when it becomes difficult. It becomes difficult because, it's not what you'd hope for. Like, how can we forgive somebody who just throws it back into our face? Like, who just continues to be so cruel? I think we can look to Jesus. We can look to Jesus here. Like, think about the day that Jesus died, right? He was surrounded. He was with his friends in the Garden of Gethsemane. He was surrounded by temple guards, and they took him away in the middle of the night, and they brought him to a trial, and it was all a setup. And then they tried him unfairly, and then they brought him to Pontius Pilate, and then Pontius Pilate, kind of just giving into the pressures that he felt, he gave him up to be crucified. None of that was fair. None of that was right? But what does Jesus say as he's going to the cross? What does he say? We've heard it in Luke 23:34. And in that place he said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. Jesus knew what had been done to him. He knew it full well. He knew the cost of that. They were going to be not only just be crucifying him, and that was unjust, but crucifying the very Messiah, the one who had come to save God himself in the flesh. You're going to kill me. He knew that. He knew the price that would need to be paid for that kind of sin. There was no question in anyone's mind, in the mind of those who crucified Jesus, that it was wrong. We just know this was wrong on all levels. But there was not a word of remorse. Right? Not a word of remorse in that time. No, oh, sorry, Jesus, we have to crucify you, right? No, it was just total hard-heartedness. But Jesus forgave. Jesus forgave at that point. A true reckoning of the damage, he had that. He understood the price that was, the thing that was owed to the offense, and he had real forgiveness in the midst of it. How is that possible? Because that's not natural to me, and it's not natural to you, right? I would argue that when there's just like such a bold-faced wrong perpetrated against us, how can we forgive in the midst of those things? Well, let's look at verse 27 here. Let's keep going. Then the master of that servant was moved with compassion, released him, and forgave him the debt. This is really a great verse about the mechanics of what's going on when forgiveness is actually happening. Moved with compassion, released him, forgiven. When someone begs forgiveness, we can be moved with compassion and forgive. That's easy, right? I mean, it's easy to look at someone who is just so broken and say, you know what, yeah, I get it. I forgive you. But just as much so, like when someone stubbornly denies that they've done anything wrong against us, we can still be moved with compassion. We can still do that, just like Jesus did. And this final step, I think is really the most essential. It's like the thing that you need to do if you're going to complete this thing of forgiveness. This final discipline in forgiveness is this. It's that we need to let compassion move us to the place of forgiveness. Let compassion move us to the place where we are releasing that person of their debt. We're just saying, you know what, yeah, the debt is paid. It's done. It's done. And when we go through this and we let compassion move us to that place where we're just saying, yes, like it's done, that is going to lead us to a place of forgiveness, right? And we can continue on in that place so we can forgive from the heart. But so often we fail. Like we fail on the point of compassion. It's a hard thing. I fail to be compassionate on a daily basis. That makes us a lot like this forgiven servant. Let's look again what the forgiven servant did. This servant, he was forgiven a great debt, but that servant went out and he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii, a small amount of money. And then he laid his hands on him and he took him by the throat saying, "Pay me what you owe me." So his fellow servant fell down at his feet and begged him, saying, "Have patience with me and I will pay you all." And he would not. But he went and he threw him into prison so they should pay his debt. So when his fellow servants saw what had been done, they were grieved. And they came and they told the master all that had been done. Then his master, after he had called him, said to him, "You wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you begged me. Should you not also have had compassion on your fellow servant, just as I had pity on you?' And his master was angry, and he delivered him to the torturers until he should pay all that was due to him. So my heavenly Father also will do to you if each of you from his heart does not forgive his brother's trespasses." That's hard to hear, right? Because if what we're saying is what we need to do is respond to hurt and pain with compassion, and I don't have compassion, how can I pay that debt, right? My dad didn't teach me to drive by just handing me the keys and dropping me off at the DMV, right? He didn't expect me to do what I didn't have the capacity to do. I have to learn it. I had to learn that. And I would argue, I would tell you, is that Jesus is teaching us compassion here. He's teaching us, and we need to come like students learning. Because it's a hard thing to say, what I have to do is to do something that I cannot do. But Jesus is he's beginning to show us what it looks like. And he begins with this story. And we can apply it to ourselves. If you and if I were in such desperate need for mercy, in such desperate debt, and Jesus responded to our need with compassion, how do we not do the same for other people? How is it that we don't do the same for other people? And forgiveness right here, it is a big thing. Forgiveness is a huge thing, right? And we think of it as this, just one of the many things that Jesus taught. But Jesus taught about it a lot. See, when it comes to forgiveness, we have to accept something that's this. Jesus isn't just making a suggestion. He's not saying it's good to forgive. He's not suggesting that we could do it if we want, but take it or leave it. You might be busy. You might not have time. You don't have the compassion. So, if you don't have the compassion, then, well, just move on. Be bitter. Jesus is teaching us. He's teaching his disciples a way of living. A way of living that needs to be learned. A discipline. Forgiveness is a discipline that we need to follow careful if we're going to be people who are really following after what he's called us to be. And by teaching us how to forgive, right? By teaching us, showing us what forgiveness is like, he's not just teaching us, some steps. What he's doing is he's teaching us a discipline by which we can develop our compassion muscle. Because you know what? You don't have a good one. It's not strong. You wouldn't want to go to the beach with that compassion muscle, right? It's a terrible joke. But he's going to strengthen us in these things. So I think the question we have to ask us is, first and foremost, is, am I a follower of Jesus? Am I a follower of Jesus? I might call myself a Christian, right? And that's great. But am I a follower of his? Am I a follower of Jesus? If you're a follower of Jesus, then you live a life in a pattern according to what he has taught is good. That's what the difference between just somebody who's a Christian, right? Somebody who knows that Jesus is good, and somebody who says, I'm going to put into practice the life that he's told me I ought to live, right? Both are saved people, right? Both going to heaven. But if you want to be a follower of Jesus and enjoy the life to the fullest that Jesus calls you, then you need to be a follower of him. Because these things lead us to be strong in places that we are weak in. They develop us, they sanctify us, bring us more to his likeness. I think a lot of us have I've spent a lot of my life being a person who was convinced that Jesus was good, right? And that he taught good things, right? And that, I should listen to him, right? I was kind of you're like a Jesus groupie, right? You're like, yeah, we love Jesus. We go to all his shows, right? We go to all his shows. But believing that Jesus teaches the truth and that I should, through rational pursuit, let my life just kind of come into agreement with his is different. It's not the same thing as following Jesus. Saying Jesus teaches forgiveness, therefore forgiveness is good, is different than saying Jesus teaches forgiveness, therefore forgiveness is good, and therefore I will forgive. Those are different things. That's an important distinction, right? One is just like somebody who's into Jesus, and it's great to be into Jesus, but he calls us to follow him, to put into practice this way of life that he's told us it's good and it's for you. It's for you.
Jesus is teaching his followers that his followers will forgive. His followers need to forgive. Forgiveness for the follower of Jesus is a way of life, and it's the way of life for those who love him. What is it? 1 John 2:3. 1 John 2:3 says this: "By this we'll know that we've come to know him, if we keep his commandments." That's a pretty straightforward statement, right? And I think it's really true, Like we can know of Jesus, but do we know him? Do we have a fellowship with him? Do we walk with him? Is he like are we following after him? Because if we do that, if we have that kind of relationship with him, we keep his commandments. To the best of our abilities, right? But to the best of our abilities, right? That doesn't mean we're going to be perfect, but we continue on by the calling that he's had, according to the strength that he gives, as he leads us there. But it means that we're led. I don't need to just like what he says or believe what he says is true. That is the start. That's the start of a relationship with Jesus. I acknowledge that he's called me a sinner. He's come, he's died to save me. And then he opens up for me this new way of living. And I can enjoy that new life as I follow him. I need to practice what Jesus taught in order to follow, because that's really how what we do. We need to go through these steps. We need to think. We need to walk our lives through these steps. We need to these steps. Understanding how we've been offended, going to someone trying to reconcile, listening to what they said, and then forgiving, responding in compassion and forgiving. They're rational, right? They just make sense. A lot of times we think, well, Jesus just teaches and it just makes sense. Well, if it makes sense, then do it. If it makes sense, then put it into practice. This is really how we're going to start to forgive. And so I just have like 3 quick points, and then we're going to end this sermon, right? So it's a scheduled landing right here. It's going to be pretty rough. We're going to descend real quick. How do we start to, okay, we get it. Jesus calls us to it, but how do we start to do this if we're bad at it? Like, how do I start to have compassion if I don't have compassion? Like, where does that begin? Well, first off, we need to learn to forgive, and we need to begin by practicing the discipline of forgiveness. Discipline, it's just following steps, right? Like when I go to the gym, it's not natural for me to do anything in there, right? But I've learned that I need to have this routine, and I need to grow and strengthen myself in order to be competent, and in order to build my muscles, and in order to do what I need to do. We need to follow through these steps. We need to follow through these steps, and we need to practice this discipline. You know why? Because this discipline, going through these steps, it forces us to the point of decision. Because most of the time when it comes to forgiveness, we're just living in indecision. We're saying, I've forgotten, right? But I'm not going to deal with the actual work that I'm called to actually forgive. Because forgive and forget is actually just avoiding the real problem. It's avoiding what needs to be done. It's avoiding what Jesus calls me to do. He's going to call me to really forgive. When we've been hurt, we need to bring ourselves mentally, spiritually, emotionally to the point where we can consciously decide, what am I going to do with this hurt? What am I going to do with this debt that I'm owed? You need to practice the discipline because it will teach your heart to deal with the real problem. You need to teach yourself and to teach your heart and to train yourself into this point where I am actually practicing forgiveness, right? It's not a natural thing. It won't ever, it might become a natural thing the more you're able to do it. This my friend Eric there, he runs marathons. I don't even think about running marathons. It hurts, But he did so because he practiced it for a long time, and I'll just keep telling myself that I'm going to do that. That's great. But it's not the same thing as being able to do it. Unless we practice forgiveness as a discipline, there's never going to be, not only that, it's like not only won't we ever just get to the point where we're actually dealing with things and making a decision to actually forgive, unless we go through this discipline and actually think about what forgiveness is and play it out, there's never going to be any rest for me. It's never going to be. You know why Jesus calls us to forgive? Yes, because he forgave us first, but because it is not good for you and I to not forgive. That is just bitterness. That is just pain. It's poison. We do not want that in our life. That's just going to lead us to, rage fantasies and just thinking about all the things that were hurt. We have to let go if we're going to lay hold of this life that he's called to give us, and live in it. Live in the peace and the rest that he says is our inheritance. We need to put away things once and for all, and we do that through forgiveness. We do it because we've gone through these steps and we've actually said, no, It's paid. I'm not owed anything anymore. And we believe it. We believe it because we've learned to do these things. Second, we need to make the choice to forgive as obedient followers of Jesus. Like, here's the deal. You need to forgive by responding with compassion to those who have hurt you and releasing them of their debt. But you're not good at being compassionate, and I'm not good at being compassionate. Again, it doesn't come naturally. A lot of the time, you're going to get to the point of decision, and you're going to say, I do not have the strength. I do not have this compassion that you're calling me to have. So how can I do it? It's at that point that we need to just say, look, I'm a follower of Jesus. I'm a follower of Jesus, and he says that I should, and he says he's going to strengthen me for it. Like he's going to give me all that I need for life and godliness. He's given it to me in his word, and I need to just go ahead and do this. One of my favorite pastors says this: forgiveness is a choice that turns into a feeling. Forgiveness is a choice that turns into a feeling, and sometimes forgiveness is just that way. Like we think compassion, like, oh, if I get to this point of decision, I don't have the compassion, all right, I guess I just can't forgive. No, like sometimes we just need to come in and just say, hey, look, I don't have it in me. But Lord, I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to understand that you are leading me to this, and I'm going to expect you to follow through with that compassion and love. You're going to actually do this work. But unless I'm taking the steps of getting to that point where I'm just giving it over to him, I'm not going to get to that point of compassion, even not having compassion and saying, Lord, I need you to pay back. We need to make a choice in the presence of Jesus, out of obedience to him, to wipe away the debt, to say, Lord, just take it away from me. You know, this is really hard. I think that like I'm not, I don't imagine that much. I'm not I don't spend a lot of time imagining, but we can use our imaginations to a good purpose. Like we can imagine what it's like. What does it look like, Lord, if I just stand in your presence and I think about this person who is not sorry, and I just say, Lord, they're forgiven. As you witness before, like, Lord, I am wiping it out, Lord, and I don't have the compassion that I need to actually make that from the heart, but you're going to supply it. Like we can, in a good way, exercise our imaginations for the glory of God to bring us to these points where we're actually able to forgive. And finally, we need to think about our own sin. We need to think about our own sin and God's mercy often. We need to spend time doing that. We need to set time aside to do that. We need to think about this wicked servant, right? Because he just went out there and he said, I'm free, and bam, I'm going to hold everybody to account now that I'm free. Right? But we need to think. He failed to think. He failed to think about the great gift that was given to him, right? And he responded with this cruelty. Like if we spend time thinking about what God has done for us and the great mercies that he's given to us, that's going to make all the difference in our lives. We are going to be people who meditate and think upon his great compassion. And then what was our experience of life is going to be is that we are like a well-oiled forgiveness machine when we do this, because we have already primed ourselves and done the work of building up this muscle of compassion. And so when it comes down to the point of decision, saying, I'm there because I have strengthened myself to this purpose already, because I have thought and understood and measured how great God's forgiveness was for me, and how could I hold something against my brother or sister that's so small and minuscule? Like, how could I do that? When our mornings start with like prayers of thanksgiving for what God has done, like that's what we're doing. We're just living in his presence. We're saying, God, thank you so much that this day your mercy is new. Thank you for your forgiveness today. Like when our days are just carried on by songs of praise, and when our nights are just filled with tears of joy that Jesus has done a good thing to us, that he's paid us from a debt, like then how could we ever hold our brothers and sisters to an account over something so small? How could we do that? Guys, we're called to something better. We're called to forgiveness. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be something that just comes naturally, but we are called to get better at it. And God's going to equip us to that purpose. Let's just pray for a second, and we're going to worship, and then I'm just going to close out here. So, Lord, we just thank you. We thank you that you are so good to us. Lord, we thank you that you're so forgiving and you're so kind, Lord, and that you call us to live like you lived, Lord. Lord, you call us to forgive like you've forgiven. Lord, you call us, Lord, and you are so awesome, and you're so gracious. You're so kind, Lord. Lord, let us never just get accepting accepting of the way things are, Lord. Would you call us to something better? You call us to life and peace, Lord, life that's found in you. Lord, we're just your people. We're your church, Lord. We've been called. Tells this story, and he begins, he says this, therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who wanted to settle accounts with his servant. That's what the kingdom of heaven is like. Like, this isn't just a story to illustrate how we are. He says, this is a story that's going to illustrate how I am. Like, and God's desire is first and foremost to settle accounts. He wants to put away the debt. He's going to put away the owing. He's going to put away these things that just plague us, man, these outstanding debts. He's a king. He came to settle accounts. He's a king who sees full well the debt that's owed to him, like, and how we've failed. He's a king who hears the plea of his people, saying, Lord, would you just forgive me? Would you have patience with me? That's what the kingdom of heaven is like. And we have this assurance throughout the word of God. We have this assurance that the answer to that plea is yes. The answer to that plea is yes. Jesus Christ died on a cross, taking the price of your sin, what was owed, paying it in full, paying your debt in full, that you might be free of it. That's what the kingdom of heaven is like. The kingdom of heaven is about settling accounts. The kingdom of heaven is about forgiveness. And we can walk in that manner of forgiveness. But before we can do that, we have to be forgiven ourselves. You know, before we can start and being people who are like Jesus Christ and that we love to forgive, we have to be people who understand the great compassion that God had for us, that Jesus took on flesh, he left heaven, he came among us, he entered into our mess, and he did it for the purpose of settling our debt. And so, you know, that's like the free gift of God. That's the free gift of God for anyone who would have it. Anyone who wants that debt paid, they can just have it through faith, through repentance, through turning away from our old ways where we've just been withdrawing and just saying, whatever, I'll pay it back later, with no intention to do so. We turn to God and we just say, Lord, I've messed up my life. I've messed up my heart. Like, I don't even know how to forgive. I don't even know how to have peace with you. I don't know how to have rest. And God says, I'm going to give you all of that because I'm like a king who pays your debt. Because I am the price, the ransom that's been given. And if that's something that you want, if you've never had that assurance of knowing, man, that this king, he's going to pay that debt, then I just want you to take some time. We're going to pray here for a second. I want you to just raise your hand and just say, Lord, like, you say it out loud, say it in your heart, Lord, I want you to forgive me. I want you to forgive me my sin. I want you to pay the debt that I'm owed. You know why we do that? We do that just like in the same capacity that we practice forgiveness, we practice repentance. We practice repentance. We practice saying to the Lord, Lord, I am in need of your paying down what I've done. But I'm in need of forgiveness. So let's just pray. I'm going to give you an opportunity to have that forgiveness, to know that it's yours in a second here. Lord, I thank you for these people standing before me, Lord. I thank you for your word, Lord. I thank you that your word was spoken to us, Lord, that you haven't kept it hidden, Lord, hidden in heaven, that you're a forgiving and good God, but Lord, you've revealed it to us on the cross. You've revealed your love to us that we might know it and be assured of it. Lord, that we might know and be assured that you have forgiven, that you have paid the debt. And Lord, I just pray that any here who have not had that debt paid, Lord, that they would have it paid today. And so if that's you, if you want to know, man, I have a debt, it is outstanding and I want it paid, just raise your hand. Just raise your hand to the Lord. Nobody's looking at you. Promises to forgive any who would come to him. Just know this, he has paid it all. He paid it all. There's no more owing between you and God. No longer are you like a servant, you are like a friend. a friend who comes in, he sits before the Lord of all things, and that God just instructs him in what's good. You can have